Great. So today we have Elizabeth Yin, one of the co-founders of Launchbit, joining us. Elizabeth, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have you. I've already told you this before. I've been following you guys for a while. Your great newsletter, HustleCon, so much awesome stuff. I think it'd be really fun to first just talk a little bit about your story and your career and how you ended up in entrepreneurship, running your own tech company, because it's a pretty fascinating story compared to a lot of the people that I read about who are, building products at age 16 and, dads are entrepreneurs and all this prototypical stories that you hear. So, I'd love to just really quick just learn just at a high level, hear from you
Sure.
about your career.
Yeah, so I've known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur for a really long time now. Actually, um, when I grew up in the valley during the dot-com boom, and so I was just starting high school around that time. And one winter break, freshman year, I had nothing else better to do, and my best friend in high school, Jennifer, said, "Well, actually, my cousin is starting an internet company." I had no idea what that was.
Right.
And maybe we could go and help him for a couple of days. And so, since I had nothing else going on, we took the train to San Francisco. And at the time, San Francisco was not nearly as posh or as startup centric as it is today. But we went to his office and we basically just built chairs, and we actually made Ethernet cables from scratch. Believe it or not, people did that.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. No Amazon Prime for that back then?
there was like not really much of anything. I think they were hosting everything on their own computers. Like,
Wow.
yeah, no cloud infrastructure whatsoever. So this was in the late '90s, and but what I loved about being there was here were a group of friends, Jennifer's cousin and his friends, and they were starting this internet startup. And it was just so exciting to be there. You could feel the energy, and all these people got to, they got to work with their friends and build something, and they could eat all the pizza they wanted. And I was like, that's for me. When I grow up, I want to do that. And so actually, during high school, Jennifer and I made a pact that we would start a company together someday. And many years passed after that. We didn't start a company right away together, but actually Jennifer's my co-founder today at Launchbit, so it did
Amazing.
work out.
Absolutely amazing that you guys have joined forces after all these years.
Yep.
And I think, in doing a little bit of homework about you, you have a really cool story in terms of uh, traveling abroad, going to work abroad, and then going to business school after that. And I'd love just to real quick hear about that, because it sounds like you have some really awesome lessons that you learned there.
Yeah, so I actually had not intended to work abroad. So I went to, I'm sorry, I don't know if
No,
this
it's
phone's
it's
bothering me.
totally cool. People get
Okay, so
phone calls.
so I went to school during the dot-com bust, actually, and college. And I was graduating in 2004, so I was just sort of recovering, but the startup environment was not particularly strong. Not a lot of people were hiring in general for tech jobs or whatnot. I studied electrical engineering at Stanford, and so I was not actually thinking about starting a business then because, so many naysayers were like, oh, well, software is, non-existent and everybody's outsourcing their jobs to India or whatnot. That later turned out not to be entirely the case. But when I was figuring out what to do my senior year of college, I thought I wanted to go to business school. And I thought that, I wanted to visit a few different business schools, and I was interested in looking at a couple of schools in Boston. But I didn't have the money to fly to Boston from the West Coast, so I actually found a contest where I could apply for, a free round trip ticket from California to Boston to go to a job fair. So this contest was held by a job fair. They were giving out these tickets to fly you from anywhere to Boston to attend their job fair, obviously with the intention that people would attend their job fair to get a job. My intention was to get the free ticket so I could go to Boston and visit my schools. And so I applied for that contest. I actually won, and I got flown over there. in order to get my reimbursement for my flight, I did actually have to attend the job fair for a couple of days. And as it would turn out, this job fair was very niche. It's the largest job fair for positions in Japan, mostly in
Oh.
Tokyo. I don't know why this is held in Boston every year. It still is today, but for whatever reason, people all over the world who want to get a job in Tokyo will go to this job fair in Boston every fall. And while I was at the job fair for those 2 days, I ended up getting a job on the spot. And I actually did not end up getting into business school, and I was really bummed about that. But then I had this job offer from the job fair, and since I didn't have anything going on after graduation, I thought, hey, why not? Like, why not just take it? And so I failed to get into business school. I was disappointed by that, but it was kind of a new, exciting opportunity to go to
Sure.
Tokyo. And I had studied some Japanese before, so I thought, it might be kind of interesting. So the next fall, I flew to Tokyo to start my job. And day one was probably, sort of a bad omen when you open up your inbox and you can't read pretty much any of the emails in there.
It usually makes it tough.
So that was a sign of kind of what was to come. Within the next month, my boss pulled me aside and was like, Elizabeth, this really isn't working out. Your Japanese isn't as great as we thought it would be. I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I getting fired? Like, this is my first job. Like, who gets fired at their first job after only 1 month? But they were very nice about it, and they let me actually stay at the company doing other things more internally.
Mm.
So it was actually a good experience in the end, but I didn't, I had to find something else. I couldn't just stay at this job forever. So I had only a short amount of time to figure out what to do. And I decided that I really actually wanted to reapply to business school, but I only had time to send in one application. And so I thought really deeply about, of all the schools I visited, which one I liked the best. And I thought that I liked MIT Sloan the best. It fit my interests the best. And so I decided to submit an application there again. And I didn't actually have time to change any of my essays. And I didn't have time to get new letters of recommendation or, take the GMAT again or anything like that. And so I just resubmitted everything as is. The only thing that was different was there was a question that asked me, what have you been doing in the last year? And so I was like, well, let me tell you. And so I wrote about Japan and my work experience there. And then next thing you know, I got in. So it's kind of crazy. Like, I failed to get into business school, so I took this job. And then I failed to keep the job, so I got into business school.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating story to me, and I think there might be something in here about like human behavior that would be interesting to dig into. So you essentially had the same exact credentials. You went
Yep.
and did a job, quote unquote, like, didn't hold the job for long, didn't necessarily succeed. Yet you found yourself now with admission to this business school. Do you think there was something particular about your application and the things that you taught, the way that you conveyed your experience, that there might be something interesting there that really stuck with the people that are reading it?
Well, yeah, I think there were two things that were different. You're right. In large part, everything was the same. But I think when it comes down to it, like in so many places in life, there are so many close calls. And so, one, I think persistence was key here. By applying again, they could tell that I was obviously very interested in the school, and just, giving yourself a second shot, even if you think you're going to be rejected, you just never know. It could have been I was really borderline the first time around. There are other little things that happen, at least as far as, schools go. Like the first time around, I don't think my application was the first one they read, and so maybe they filled up all the spots, even though it's not a rolling admissions process.
Sure.
In some sense it is. Maybe second time around, my application, got to the top of the stack and was one of the first ones they read, and so there were more slots open. Who knows? But persistence was really key, I think, and not just for this, but obviously for so many other things. I think just giving yourself lots of shots by just trying is really important. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, with that additional essay, I think I was able to differentiate myself a little bit more the second time around. I don't know how many people at the time were working abroad. It wasn't a really popular thing to do back then. I think nowadays many more people are certainly working abroad, but even so, I would still not say it's a super popular thing to do.
Yeah.
So differentiation.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, I think in general, like, there's so much power in this concept of contrast in terms of, you know, we're in any situation, wherever you're doing, whether it's applying for a job, whether it's trying to get into a school, whether it's trying to be noticed at a party, right? If you're different than everybody else, and you own that, and you're comfortable in that space, there's just a position of power there. Because people are excited about originality. So that's really cool. I love to hear that. What a great example. So, okay, so you business school, awesome. Now you had another startup before Launchbit. And it sounds like that was an interesting learning experience. Tell me a little bit about what that company did and kind of, you know, how that shaped your experience today.
Certainly. So after business school, I went to work at Google for a little bit. And while I was there, on the side, I was working on a startup called ParrotView. I was working on it with actually a different friend of mine. And it was a social shopping web application where you could effectively browse together in real time, you know, different retail items with your friends. And I mean, basically the reason it failed was nobody was using this. And so
that's always a reason why things don't work if no one uses it.
Yeah, and so, you know, I think for us though, what we didn't realize going into it was we thought, oh, well, you know, the biggest problem with internet companies is the technology. Like, people don't build the technology right. So we spent all of our time building this technology for almost a year, doing on nights and weekends, and then only worried about marketing it and getting adoption later. And we just, you know, I actually think there are interesting things in that space. Around co-browsing. I don't know if you've seen Firefly, but they're a co-browser kind of solution for customer support. And I mean, there are certainly many interesting things in social shopping, separate of co-browsing. But we didn't have the right product for kind of the right use case, and we didn't have adoption. And so the lesson learned was what we should have done. We should have reversed things. We should have gotten our customers first, or at least talked with people to figure out, you know, what to build. And we, you know, I think, you know, we probably, for that kind of thing, we would have needed some sort of prototype since it was a consumer product, but I think we could have made it much, much toned down and simpler and launched it a lot quicker. One thing that really stands out in my mind, I remember when we were building this thing, you know, we would often be talking about like little features that we would spend time on, like, oh, should we add like, you know, so-and-so is typing kind of message to this, and, you know, pop that up when someone is typing. And it's just like, you don't need that in V1 at all. You should just like launch the damn thing and see if, you know, anybody is interested. And we didn't get that memo until a lot later.
Right. It's not like somebody's going to be like, oh, this is the perfect solution, but you know what, I can't see someone's not typing, so I'm not going to use it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is it's a lesson that everybody, I mean, very few first-time entrepreneurs are able to completely see past this and be able to be super lean and prove out their hypotheses before building things. And yeah, I mean, I think this is a great example of that. So you think that if you think you would still need to build some type of technology in order to prove out whether there was actually demand for this product or what people wanted?
Well, I think it depends on the angle. So in the beginning, we were starting out as like a consumer kind of angle. And so for consumer product, I think maybe you do need to build a really bare bones prototype.
Okay.
Later, we actually tried to pivot, if you will, like pivot that product into sort of a white label tool that we could sell to online retailers. And so in that sense, it wouldn't be completely consumer based. There's sort of a B2B to C kind of angle to that. And the most telling thing about that experience when we were pivoting it was we really didn't have time to make tech changes to white label it. And so what I did was I would put together 5 PowerPoint slides and just try to take screenshots and add those to the slides and sell the deck basically to
Right.
e-commerce companies and ask them, hey, would you pay for this? Would you pay for this? And plenty of people said no. Like I approached about 100 people, but there were a handful actually where they would be willing to pay good money for this, like $50,000 and whatnot. And these people didn't know me, and I didn't know them, and we'd never met in person before. I was selling this actually over the phone. But when people really want something, they are willing to prepay for things that don't exist, and that was very eye-opening to me as well.
Yeah, pre-sales is a concept that you don't believe in until you see it firsthand.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, there's no way that somebody would actually write me a check or promise me money unless they can actually test it. And actually, yeah, there's a lot of people that do that, and it's super powerful. So at that point, when people said that they would pay $50,000, I mean, what was your next move?
Yeah, so I was really excited, but actually at that point, we had been going so long. I think this was like a year and a half. Everyone had kind of quit their full-time jobs and was working on this all the time, and morale was generally down with the team, just because nothing had happened with the consumer product, and for the longest time I was not getting any traction on the sales side for pre-selling this either. But so by the time like we had our first company say, hey, yeah, we will pay for this. And people were just like already checked out, like totally checked out. And at that point we just decided to abandon it completely for morale reasons.
Honestly, it's a great lesson in just momentum and team happiness, because even if you pre-sell something and you get like some sense of validation, it still is a lot of work to actually actualize that, right?
Sure.
And the validation is just a very small part of it. So that makes total sense. Now, after ParrotView, after ParrotView, then came Launchbit. Why don't you tell everyone first what Launchbit is today, and then we can talk about the early days of Launchbit and maybe how some of the lessons that you learned at the previous company were manifested in the early days of Launchbit.
Sure. So Launchbit is an ad network for email newsletters. So we have a number of email newsletter publishers, and we help them make money essentially by giving them an ad widget that they can put in their email newsletters. In some sense, it's a lot like the Google AdSense program and how bloggers can monetize through AdSense. But in this case, it's for email newsletters. And so we help advertisers reach their niche audiences and publishers monetize.
Got it. So I'm a newsletter. I have a newsletter. There's X thousand people on it. I'm not making any money on it today, but at the end of the day, there is people that want to penetrate my audience. You help broker those relationships and connect the people that are trying to reach the audience with publishers that have them.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So okay, so talk to me about the early days of Launchbit. You had this idea for this way to connect buyers and sellers. How did you get your first customer? Did you build technology? Did you brute force it? Tell me about how you made that first brokered relationship actually happen.
Sure. So actually taking a step back from that, so after ParrotView failed, I teamed up with my best friend from high school, Jennifer, the one I made a pact with.
Yes.
And we decided that we would start a company together. And knowing what I had known about my failed company, ParrotView, I knew that the second time around, I didn't want to make the same mistake. It was really important for us to find customers before building as much as possible. And in particular, we were interested in exploring areas of helping companies with customer acquisition. Like it's a problem that obviously I faced at ParrotView. We had no customers. Plenty of other startups and companies face customer acquisition problems. So we did not actually have a particular idea like, oh my gosh, I want to build this ad network. That was not how we went into it, but more like is there a tool that we can build or something that we can build to help companies with their customer acquisition? And so we started out by so first of all, we entered the 500 Startups Accelerator program in the summer of 2011. I think it was the end of May is when it started. And we actually were very fortuitous. It was one of the first classes at the accelerator program, and they let us in without a particular idea. And that's kind of rare. I don't think you're able to do that today.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so we went in without an idea. Meanwhile, all of our batchmates, were making lots of money and they had an idea. But Jennifer and I were just trying to figure out, all right, what can we build that would help with customer acquisition? And we tried all kinds of things. We tried like building an AdWords optimizer. We tried some social media stuff. And we spent a lot of time talking with marketers to figure out, what their problems were. And one thing that actually came up over and over, and we actually had some personal experience with this as well, was that people actually said that they had good experience in buying email ads, which was kind of, I don't know, it kind of made me think a little bit because, that wasn't the first thing that came to mind. Email ads is not really sexy. Email is not very sexy, and neither are ads. But people had success with that. One of the problems that a lot of advertisers or marketers were facing was that they, in order to buy email ads, they had to broker a deal with this publisher and then broker a deal with that publisher, and everything was on a one-off basis where they had to kind of keep track of all these different buys. And oftentimes, larger companies could have whole teams of people where, you could have 5 people to a team and one person does the outreach and somebody else, does the ad operations and somebody else pays the publisher or whatever. But in order to do this at scale, but most companies, don't have teams of people just doing email ad buys. So we thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity to build a network there, an email ad network, where essentially you buy once through us and we get you in a variety of different in a variety of email publishers.
Got it.
And so the first thing that we did was, well, we said, all right, we're not going to build anything. What do we need? We need advertisers and, well, we need publishers. So the very first week of testing out this idea, I approached a handful of email newsletter publishers. I approached a couple of online advertisers and then just manually tried to broker them together. Like I said, all right, this is how much this will cost. PayPal, my personal PayPal account. Send me your ad creative, and then I would email the ad creative to the publishers. And that's what we did for the first week, actually for the first several weeks, but that's how we started. And then the very first thing that we built was, well, advertisers wanted to know, well, okay, I bought this, but how many impressions did I get? Who saw it? How many clicks did I get? What actually happened? And so we built a very rudimentary analytics system. Like it literally just counted impressions and clicks.
Pixel.
Yep.
Awesome.
And there was no interface either. Like we didn't have a website. We would email these stats to our advertisers. And we did this for several weeks.
And so when you say you approached publishers and advertisers, because, these could be your next door neighbors and best friends or just people that you saw had a newsletter. Was this cold emailing? Was this warm introductions? Was this, like through the standard newsletter advertising at email.com, whatever? Tell me a little bit about that.
It was kind of both. We did know some people who ran email newsletters. We started out with, I guess, the startup vertical, if you will. So advertisers who wanted to reach startups and publishers who wrote about either startup events or startup news or something. So in that sense, we were tapped in a little bit. Like we knew many online marketers who were trying to reach startups. So that was not cold emailing. And then on the publisher side, some people we did know, like we just happened to know them from the startup community. Other people we didn't know at all. Like, for example, the Hacker Newsletter is one of our publishers. And they've been with us. Yeah, Kale. Yeah. Kale is awesome. And so we've been, we've been working with him for 2 years now, but we didn't know him in the beginning. It was a total cold email, and he's great. But we've gotten to know people over the years, and so I think he was one of our first handful of publishers, like literally.
So would you say when somebody's going to look to find their first customer, that the first place they should survey is the personal network? Is that logical? The logical step?
Yeah, I kind of walk a fine line on that. I think that, if you just work with friends for the sake of friends, then it's tough because you may not get the honest feedback you need. But these people we were talking with in on both the publisher side and the advertiser side, like they were legitimate, advertisers and legitimate publishers. If it was not a good fit for them, they were honest about it, because they have a business to run, or this is like how they want to take their hobby. So it's not like having a consumer product where they said, okay, sure, I'll use your like photo sharing app or something.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I have some friends who have SaaS products that, I'm pretty sure that their friends are just paying them because they're friends. But at the same time, what is cool is that they put those logos on their website and they're meaningful and they allow them to sell into further partners. So I guess there's probably a fine balance between, starting out, getting some friends on there that allows you some leverage to basically go get some more unbiased feedback. But that I can totally see like how awesome it would be if right out of the gates you can go ahead and sign somebody that isn't your friend, doesn't owe you one, and is using your product because it just provides a ton of value.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about the outreach and what you guys had found effective as you started to have a few publishers and you started to build this marketplace of supply side and demand side in terms of an ad network. Were people coming to you because you're producing content? Were you guys hitting the pavement, going out and getting publishers, getting advertisers? Talk to me a little bit about that process.
Oh yeah, I was definitely hitting the pavement. So the first couple of weeks, we kept the beta tests really small because we didn't even know if this was something we were going to do yet. So first couple of weeks, we had 6 publishers and 2 advertisers. That's it. And everything was manual. We had no technology. After that, like we saw good results. And so we decided, all right, we'll keep testing. We need to grow a little bit more. So we needed to grow our publisher base. And the next growth essentially was from 6 to roughly 20 or 25 publishers or so. And again, we wanted to keep everybody in the same vertical. So they were all entrepreneurship related newsletters.
Sure.
And so we, at that point, like I don't have 25 friends who run entrepreneurship newsletters. I mean, now I do, but I didn't know these people before. So we were definitely cold emailing a lot of people. So it was quite manual. We had a team of 2. Well, so Jennifer and I were working with a friend at the time who was helping us out a little bit. So the 3 of us were tag teaming it, doing research. Like one person was doing research around, all right, who were all the entrepreneurship newsletters? One person was doing outreach, and one person was like, brokering all the operations at the end, like making sure that the ad campaign went out correctly and the person got paid, etc. And that's how we were tag teaming it for the first few weeks, actually. And then same thing with the advertiser side. We had to find advertisers who were interested in reaching entrepreneurs. So we were doing a lot of cold emailing. We did get some warm intros through email from some people, but it was like a lot of hustle.
I love it. And talk to me about in terms of like identifying initial people that you were going after. Were you going after the biggest, baddest startup email list, or are you going after people that currently weren't monetizing, that it would just be super easy to sell to? Talk to me a little bit about kind of your targeting at this stage in the game.
Both, actually. So we approached everybody from really small lists to really large lists. And, you just never know, like, we actually, even to this day, we're not able to find patterns. Like, we can't predict whether somebody will do this or not. Like, if they're running ads already, then maybe they're interested in working with us to get more ads, but sometimes they're not. And alternatively, if they're not running ads at all, maybe they're interested because, we can help them monetize, but maybe there's a reason they're not running ads. So even to this day, we have not been able to find a pattern, like whether it's their big publisher or small publisher. So we just approach everybody who was relevant and seem to have a good list.
Interesting. Yeah. That's all. That's always a debate that I have with friends, because it's, when I step into the office of, a big bad company that rhymes with Moogle or somebody like that, I want to make sure that I'm polished, that I have some proof, that, have come from a place of some authority and credibility. And you guys, it sounds like, decided that, you know, if you wanted to just put it out there, and if somebody was going to go for it, they were going to go for it. So that takes a lot of courage. I give you a lot of credit for that.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I think it was sort of coincidental that we picked the startup vertical, but I think people in the startup vertical are probably more forgiving because they're running startups or no startups.
Right.
So that certainly worked in our favor. Like, even though things looked crappy, or we didn't even have an interface for most of that time in the beginning. You know, secondly, I think beyond the fact that they were in the startup vertical, I mean, if people really had a pain point, like they really did want to make money from their newsletter, like it didn't really matter how we looked.
Just raising my hand because I run a newsletter that I don't make any money on.
Yeah, so I mean, you don't care too much about, you know, our design or whatnot. Like, we're not a photo sharing app where maybe some of those need to be a little bit more polished.
Right. And, you know, at what point, so, you know, I always think about how, like, the goal of business development is essentially to cannibalize yourself so that you're no longer hitting the pavement, and eventually people are just coming to you because you've become the authority in a particular space, and that's just where you go when you want to monetize your newsletter. Has there been kind of an inflection point in the business for you guys where all of a sudden you just started generating a ton of inbounds? And I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if we stage this, the first stage was the very early stage where we had nothing, 0 to roughly, you know, 20 publishers, and we used the same method of just hustling our way to, I would say, even our first 100 publishers. Not very much technology. Like, we did start building out some technology at the end of 2011. Again, not many interfaces, mostly just manually emailing people stats. Like, most of the technology was around payment and stats.
I love that.
So that was the first stage. That was from the summer of 2011 to the end of 2011. The next stage was in 2012, January roughly till about September or so was kind of when we were in our mid stage. And for that, the inflection point that you're talking about where the growth really started happening was actually in around September of 2012. But before the inflection point, in the first part of 2012, we were still largely doing a lot of hustling. We started automating a lot of pieces, which started to actually help us a lot. So a few things happened. One, we were able to streamline a lot of our operational work, if you will. So instead of emailing everybody everything, you know, we started building out our site. We built out this payment system, auction system, targeting, like all those things that we didn't have in 2011, we started building out. And so that streamlined a lot of things, like fewer customer support requests, which meant that we could also hustle more. So that was one. We were still hustling. But two, we also started building out tools to help us hustle. Like, it's very hard to just think up, like, okay, think of 500 email newsletters. Like, I'll bet you can't do it, and I can't do it either. Just off the top of your head.
No way.
So we started, you know, building out scripts like, all right, well, let's see if we can find email newsletters on the web. And, you know, there's still a lot of hustle and high touch at this point, don't get me wrong. But we started building out tools to make the process easier and more streamlined. Like, okay, you know, this tool helps us do research. This tool helps us, you know, streamline people through, you know, through our system. So we actually started paying for some SaaS tools. We use Freshdesk to kind of channel, you know, these emails into customer support, these emails into they want to join our network, like just channel people through the right you know, channels.
Yep.
We also started hiring contractors to help us with some of these pieces. Like, you know, we've got a great customer support team, so that way it alleviates a lot of the load off of the really high touch hustling. So that way we could spend more time basically hustling efficiently, if you will.
Right. Did you use any virtual assistants for this stuff?
Yes. Well, I mean, we didn't use any of the official virtual assistant programs, but we definitely have used a lot of contractors. We've gone through Odesk quite a bit.
Right.
And that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, I bring it up because, you know, one of my buddies who I've done an interview with was one of the original biz dev guys at Udemy. And I know they did something very similar where they were essentially using a combination of scripts, they're using scripts to essentially identify these teachers. And I apologize if I'm miscommunicating this. And then they were using virtual assistants to actually do the initial cold outreach, which is just like automating the very early stages of the funnel, so that ultimately they could focus on the high touch stuff, which is really, really smart.
Yep, I've talked a lot with Goggin about this process, and it was sort of coincidental. We used a very similar process, but I've also taken some of his tips and incorporated them along the way. So very similar.
That's actually great. And speaking of hustling, you just put on a conference called HustleCon, and I was absolutely gushing when I heard the title of it. So tell me a little bit about, not many startup founders have the initiative to go on and put on a whole conference. Tell me a little bit about what sparked the inspiration for that.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm really passionate about the customer acquisition space, in particular as it applies to startups. It's just really hard to do customer acquisition.
Yeah.
Like, let's just be honest. And that's probably the #1 reason why most startups fail. It's not that, your Ruby code broke. It's that, you didn't have any users or customers. So it's something that I've kind of wanted to do for a while now, but obviously I haven't had a whole lot of time. Since we hit our inflection point last September, though, things are a little bit more streamlined, and I, had a little bit more time. And one of my friends just sold his company, and my friend Eric, who used to run Beat the GMAT, he sold his company, and so he has extra time, and so we were like, oh, well, we were talking about this idea, well, let's just, put something together. And so it was a really small conference. We wanted it to be manageable, so that was not totally time-consuming and overwhelming. We only had 200 people, but we sold out, and the whole premise was about, how can you, as a non-technical founder, if you are one, really get your business going? And our focus was on just getting, great speakers who were, business founders to talk about the tactical things they did to scale up their startup and start their startup. And actually, Goggin was one of our speakers, and he gave a great presentation on that.
I believe it. And it seems like to me, so much in terms of customer acquisition is really relationship hustling, especially in the beginning. Getting featured on certain blogs, getting tweeted, getting all these distribution from these big channels. I mean, it really comes down to just old school relationship building. And that's just pure hustle. It's putting in the sweat equity. Were there any particular themes from that conference where you walked away and thought, every non-technical founder should really incorporate this into their toolkit?
A lot of people talked about persistence, and I'm obviously a huge believer in that. I mean, when somebody says no, it actually doesn't necessarily mean no. When you're trying to sell them something or do a deal, it basically just means that they're not ready now. But
yep.
I found that, at least for Launchbit, if you cultivate that relationship, eventually that can turn into yes when they trust you and they get to know you and they figure out what you're all about and that kind of thing. And so that, I think, is something that has sort of helped us more recently and kicked in. Goggin actually spoke about this a bit, and as you know, the first stage of Udemy was really about hustling, much like for us. But then at some point for them, and I wouldn't say we're quite there yet, but we're starting to see it, their brand is kicking in, where everybody's read about them in TechCrunch and everything, and now if you're thinking about doing an online course or whatnot, you might think about Udemy, just because they're well known, and it's sort of ingrained. Over and over, I've heard about Udemy so much, oh, well, if I want to teach a course, I'll think about Udemy or something. And similarly for Launchbit, we want to build enough rapport with different folks in the community such that people talk about it, and if you are thinking about monetizing your email newsletter, or if you're thinking about advertising to niche demographics, I want you to think about Launchbit.
Right. Yeah. One of the kind of mindsets that I try to instill upon some of the people that I mentor and talk to is when somebody says no, that just means you haven't provided enough value to them for them to, help you out with whatever it is. I mean, that's all that means. It does not mean that they don't like you. It doesn't mean that you should go put your head in the sand and never talk to them again. It just means that, hey, there's an opportunity cost trade-off for whatever you're asking them to do, and you have not created enough value or leverage for yourself at this point in the game for them to comply. And that just means you have to get back to work. And like, I think it was a Ramit Sethi podcast that I was listening to, and he talked about how he wanted to write for the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or something, and he just said, the quote was like, I can wear this person down, like, until they say that I'm, can write for them, whatever it is. And I just love that, because it's so true. If you're persistent enough in a non-obtrusive way, like, you can eventually win someone over.
Yep. I totally agree.
But the key is to be non-obtrusive, because there's a balance, and I like to call it patient persistence, where if you're too over the top, then you just come off as annoying. And that first interaction or whatever it is, you want that person to be excited about the opportunity to help you, not feel like it's obligatory.
Yep.
And that calibrating with, that it's a skill. It takes, a long time to cultivate, but that's some really, really cool lessons.
Yep, definitely. So persistence is, I think, the one word I would say is the most important for starting a business.
Yeah. So lastly, I just want to ask you just a little bit about newsletters, because I run one. Maybe people out there or who are watching also run one. Maybe they're thinking about doing one. So I guess, when is it realistic to think that a newsletter can go from a fun thing that you share with friends to potentially an income generating, asset?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in our, amongst our publishers, we've got the whole range. And we have a lot of people who I would say are hobbyists. They make some good, extra beer money from their newsletters. And then some people are able to take that to the next level, where it's actually their full-time job for one person, where they, make on the order of $100,000. And so let's talk about the hobbyists first. I think it starts to become an interesting hobby around, assuming you have a good list, around the 10,000 person mark. So just sort of running the quick math on that, if you have like a 20% open rate, which I consider to be pretty good, then you're talking about essentially 2,000 people seeing an ad per send. And then, for 2,000 people seeing it, you're probably talking about making anywhere, obviously depending on the vertical, but anywhere between like, $10 to $50 or $60 per send. So that starts to become interesting as a hobby.
Is it typically bought CPM or CPC?
With us, we're a CPC network. So sorry, those numbers that I'm talking about, and pardon the phone again.
No, it's really cool.
Those numbers I'm talking about are on a CPC basis. If you're doing CPM, you can get a lot higher. It can be, sometimes double to 10x higher. However, sort of the chicken and egg problem is typically you only start to get clout on a CPM basis if you're already big. Right. So for many of the hobbyists who have smaller lists, it's kind of hard to consistently sell on a CPM basis. If you are very niche-y, like your newsletter, for example, is very niche-y, and I would, if you were to ask for my 2 cents, I would keep it that way, focused on business development, because it means that, a lot more advertisers are interested in reaching a niche-y audience and are willing to pay more for that. And so what you can probably start to do is kind of mix and match. Like a number of our publishers are at the point where, maybe they have 10,000 or 20,000 subscribers. If they're in a niche area that's popular, they can sell sometimes on a CPM basis and make a lot more money. And at other times when they can't fill, they run CPC ads, and they can make some good hobby money. And between those two, that's when you start to see that this is kind of a nice side hobby. If you want to take it to the next level and make over $100,000, you obviously have to grow your list quite a bit. And typically, people we see who are doing money at that level, it generally scales linearly. So you can do the math to see how many subscribers you need.
Right. One thing that I was thinking about is, do you guys ever do essentially, because one of the places that, and this is maybe just within my own self bias of my newsletter, one of the places that people spend the most money is trying to recruit people, and there's all these tech startup newsletters, and I mean, are there people that are using newsletters in order to advertise jobs? Is that a thing?
Yeah, so we actually have a number of recruiters who are advertisers, particularly in our programming vertical, as you can imagine.
Surprise, surprise.
So yeah, there are a number of people who use our ad slots to run recruiting ads. There are also newsletters within our publisher base who run their own separate job ads as like a separate section. So they have their ad slot, but then they also have their job ads. There are a number of different ways you can monetize them. So that could be lucrative as well, obviously depending a lot on your vertical.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, Elizabeth, this has been so awesome to hear your story. It's so cool that, just to hear your journey. I mean, it's totally inspiring. If people are interested in learning more about Launchbit, where should they go?
Well, thanks for having me, Scott. They should go to launchbit.com, and I still believe very heavily that we're still in the startup stages, and I like the high touch. So if people want to email me personally, they can at elizabeth@launchbit.com. I try to get back to as many people as I can, quickly. That's kind of my thing.
That's awesome. And I have to advocate. You guys put out an excellent newsletter around customer acquisition. There's been business development stuff. I mean, there's been just so many. It's like valuable 4 to 5 articles periodically. I really enjoy it. Where can people sign up for that if they just want to stay in touch with you guys and get good content?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. I don't think there's a really easy URL to map out in this interview, but I can send that for you to append.
Cool. I will append to the notes. And are you on Twitter? If anybody wants to do a little tweet action at you?
Sure, yeah, at Launchbit.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much. This has been great. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more about either starting the email newsletter, monetizing your email newsletter, reaching audiences of email newsletters, you got to go check out Launchbit. All right, Elizabeth. Thanks,
so
much.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye.